This is Fightful Wrestling. My name is Jimmy Van. I am the founder and owner of Fightful.com. Now, normally my managing editor, Sean Ross Sapp, handles the interviews, but today's topic is near and dear to my heart. I am joined by a gentleman who was the product design manager for LJN Toys from 1985 to 1988, meaning he was heavily involved in the creation and production of the WWF LJN action figure line. I'm sure everybody's familiar with them, those 8-inch rubber wrestlers from the 80s. I think he's going to have some great insight. His name is Bill Stanhope. Bill, how you doing, sir?
Very good. How are you?
I'm good. It's a pleasure to talk to you. We've gone back and forth over email a bunch about this stuff, and I think you're going to have a lot of interesting things to talk about. I want to start by telling you, and I talked a little bit about this off the air. I grew up in the 80s. I was a big fan of the line, and over the last 6 or 7 years, I've been collecting the set, what they call MOC, mint on card, meaning new in the package. And today I've got the entire collection in the package, all of the variants. I've got a bunch of the prototypes as well. There's a pretty large community of WWF LJN fans today. And there's been a resurgence in popularity for the brand in recent years. Probably the catalyst for the episode of the Netflix show, The Toys That Made Us, that you were interviewed for. My first question is, are you surprised by any of this, by this popularity that has, kind of come around for LJN over the last several years?
I don't think surprise is the right word. I'd say shocked.
Is that right?
Oh, when we were back doing it, I mean, listen, it was a great gig. It was a great job because I got to meet all of these famous people. Right. And so I'm not going to, disguise that. I mean, it was a lot of fun. But at the same time, I mean, it was a job, and we were just working so fast to try to get these things out, and it was just a massive amount of work because sure. It was a very small company. LJN, we had, I don't remember how many designers, but I came from Hasbro. Hasbro had, 10 times the amount of design staff that they had at LJN. So we as design managers, everything we did was outsourced to freelancers or outside sculptors and also designers and other people. Mm-hmm. So it was just a huge coordinating effort, to try to get all the things done. So we were just so involved in that part. And then when I left LJN and LJN went under, we hadn't really given it much thought for so many years until the guys from Toys That Made Us contacted me. So
right. Well, I spoke online a little while ago to a guy named Lance Kirk. I'm sure you know who that is.
I don't think I.
Okay, maybe you don't. So Lance was the president and CEO of LJN Toys, but I think he was there after you left. He was there from '89 to '91. And I hit him up because I'm still trying to find some of the unreleased prototypes and see if anything's out there. So on a whim, I reached out to him, and his response to me, and I'm going to read you exactly what he said. He said, "Unfortunately, all of the toys and action figures I had at one time, I disposed of. Probably not the wisest decision, but no going back." The interesting thing is you kept all your stuff.
Yeah, actually, that and a couple other lines of things that I had worked on. But when I was laid off, I mean, the company, I was in one of the last layoffs, and we kind of knew the company was going down. So I just packed up my my office, filled up a couple of big boxes, and took them home. But I never had a lot of the production stuff. I mean, everything either it was first shot kind of items, or I had the prototypes, and I have some of the waxes. So. Right. So it's all the really cool stuff that everybody wants to see.
Yeah.
But yeah. Just I kept the boxes. We moved a couple of times. I kept them. They were up in my attic, and when we found out this was interesting, I took a picture. I went up to my attic and I said, I know I have a couple boxes up here. Brought them downstairs, laid them out on the floor, a bunch of the characters laid them on the floor, and sent a picture to the guys from the Toys That Made Us.
Right.
And they were shocked. They were like, "Oh my God!"
Yeah,
you know what you have. So
I was telling Bill off the air that I talked to Mark Cardona about the stuff from time to time, and he referred to somebody as his guy. Like if I would have a question about, say, the Tito Santana prototype, Matt would say, "Let me talk to my guy." I found out that his guy was Bill Stanhope. So,
well, a lot of people told me back then. He says, be really careful. You have a lot of really cool stuff, and you got to be careful getting your name out there. And
Yes.
so for a while, we kind of just kept it pretty quiet.
Right. Right.
And,
Well, let me take it start from the beginning. So before you were involved with the LJN WWF line, were you a wrestling fan?
um, I not a huge fan. I was a fan to the extent that I knew of a lot of the guys back in when I was growing up. It was Haystacks Calhoun
Sure.
and Gorilla Monsoon and those kinds of guys. And so I was from Attleboro, Mass, and in South Attleboro there was a venue. I can't think of the name of the place now, but anyway, they used to have the wrestling matches all the time. So I mean, to that extent, yes, but by the time I was at LJN. I'm an adult. I've got a kid on the way, and just you're not really thinking about that. Going out to the wrestling matches at that point. So
Sure, sure. Now, is it true that Galoob was the front runner for the WWF rights, but they made the mistake of using MCA Universal as a reference, not knowing that MC Universal had bought LGN, and so they told LGN that Galoob was after the line, and LGN stepped in and got it. Is that true?
you know what? I don't know that part of the story.
Okay.
Back then, the first year, Jose Longoria was the designer on the line, and then so I come in to LJN a year after they really started. So most of my knowledge is from secondhand from the guys talking about what had happened the year before, and I was friends with a lot of them, so I kind of heard a lot of the stories, and I was kind of back and forth with them. But yeah, I'm not 100% sure of that. I can't comment.
Okay, and right before the line launched, Remco released the first AWA line because Remco had been after the WWF line first and lost out. They released their AWA line. What were your thoughts on that, and did they impact LGN's plans at all?
Um, I don't know as far as on the marketing side. I don't know if it impacted it at all. I don't think so. Remco was really known back then for doing that kind of stuff. I mean, they were always coming in looking at knockoffs
Mm-hmm.
and how they could come in close, and they weren't doing a quality product at all. So even though Kurt Bazigian from Hasbro considered us as being dog toys, and I know Kurt.
It was a very popular dog toy. What can you say?
Yeah, yeah. I was friends with. I'm still friends with Kurt. But yeah, I thought that was pretty funny.
So,
But yeah, the companies like that, they were always going to do that. They were always knocking off anything that was getting any traction. So
right.
it wasn't surprising.
Tell me about your involvement with LGN Toys with respect to the WWF line day to day. Like, what was your day to day like?
Well, the day to day was really coordinating with sculptors and designers and working out the line of characters. Most of the time, we would receive a list of new wrestlers that they wanted to do, and for us to get started with it, we would get. Back then they did a magazine, WWF magazine,
Mm-hmm.
and they would have a featured article of the wrestler that they wanted to work with. Because remember, guys, this was there's no internet, so you couldn't
Right.
go on the internet and say, hey, what does this guy look like, and what are his favorite moves and all that stuff. So you kind of learned from a press kit that they would make up, and and it would have in it the magazine, and it would have a lot of press shots, 8x10 glossies of the wrestlers and some other information about them. And then we would get a hold of the sculptors, usually directly, and start working out what their pose was. And because I had a whole list of sculptors that we worked with back then,
Right.
and so that was the day to day, is just move them forward, keep them going, keep them going. So
And who determined you kind of said that you were given a list. Who determined which wrestlers were going to be featured? Was that a Vince McMahon call?
I think that was it was between Vince McMahon. Yes, I mean it's ultimately it was a Vince McMahon call, and he would coordinate with I doubt very much if he was coordinated directly with Jack Friedman, but probably um, maybe Paul Samolsky, who was my boss. Uh, he was head of the whole design process at LJN. Or one of the other people higher ups, but they would send over the list of wrestlers, because we were always pushing for more wrestlers. What can we do? What can we do? What was the
Right.
next one?
Right.
So
Right. And did you yourself, did you have any direct involvement with Vince or with any of the wrestlers?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah. For anytime we were doing the characters, we would go over to up to Stamford, Connecticut, to the WWF, and we would meet with Vince, and he would look at the wrestlers, and uh, only a couple of times did we have to redo the characters. But every so often, they didn't like the sculpting or they didn't like the pose, and we would have to redo somebody. Um, but yeah, we would meet with him at TV commercials. I met a bunch of the wrestlers. We went to some of the wrestling events. We had them over at Christmas parties at the toy that LJN would have, and at Toy Fair in February, New York Toy Fair, we would have the wrestlers come in, a different wrestler each day.
Okay, okay. Now I got to ask, Vince McMahon, he's pretty legendary in terms of his cutthroat business acumen. So, what was it like working with Vince McMahon?
You know, he seemed very professional to me. I mean, he's a little intimidating. He's a big guy.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, remember I was in my 20s back then too, so
Right, right.
all of this was pretty intimidating. Um, but yeah, we would meet him in his office, and they went from a smaller office in Stamford to a much larger new building in Stamford. So you could see how well they were doing too
Right.
with this whole thing.
Now I got to ask, do you have a good personal story about Vince McMahon, either from your personal dealings with him or from maybe one of your colleagues' dealings with him?
I don't.
Oh, that's unfortunate.
Sorry about that.
Now, what about the wrestlers? From your recollection, who were the easiest ones to work with? Who were the hardest ones to work with?
None of the guys were hard to work with. I mean, just you gotta understand. Back then, I'm meeting these guys, and I've got a wrestler that looks like them. I mean, that right there is pretty cool. So you're not going to treat the guy who just made a likeness of you and is making a toy badly. So
Sure,
I
sure.
I always had really good relations with the guys at TV commercials and at Toy Fair. The one that was the most intimidating to me was actually Gorilla Monsoon because he wanted a character made of him,
Right.
but we weren't doing those guys. We were just doing the wrestlers at the time, and
Hmm.
so as announcers and other people, we weren't necessarily doing that many of them, and we just didn't do one of him. But he came at Toy Fair, and he is huge.
Hmm.
I mean, he is a really big guy. I'm 6 foot, but he's I don't I don't even know how tall he is.
6'6", I think.
6'6". Yeah, I was going to say 6'5" or 6'6".
Hmm.
And so he comes there, and his wife is there, and his wife is this little woman, and she is just the nicest person and everything. And so I get called. I'm in the back back then at Toy Fair. It's a little different from what people are used to as a typical um, show that you go to the Javits Center. Back then, it would all be at the toy buildings, and there were two big toy buildings back then. It was 1107 Broadway in New York, and 205th. I'm sorry, 205th Avenue. So it's exactly where the roads kind of come together. And there was a bridge that goes across on the buildings, and in those buildings were all of the showrooms. So you would work there, and you'd have your marketing offices and design offices, but then you also had a showroom office that was really only used, a couple of times a year. And Toy Fair was the big time, and so you would set up this kind of walking path through this showroom, and in the walking path, there would be presenters, models that you would hire, and marketing would give them a script, and they would learn that, and they would be able to tell you all about the new wrestling figure. And you'd have all your prototypes up on the wall, and then the buyers would come in and they'd walk through, and we'd set up a little half ring. The first year they set up a full wrestling ring down at the bottom of the building. There was a big like a dance hall area, and so they set up the full ring, and they had the wrestlers there. But every year after that, we just set up like a little half ring kind of thing up in the showroom.
Right.
So I'm in the back there, and I'm just talking to some of the people, and I get this call that there's somebody out there to come through the line, and I have no idea who it's going to be, but that was part of our job, was to bring people through the line that weren't sort of non-buyers. So if there was somebody in the industry or somebody or one of the wrestlers, some whoever it was, it would be up to like the design managers to show them around. So I walk out, and I look up, and I see Gorilla Monsoon, and I like, oh wow, this is cool. And so the person at the desk introduces me. This is Gino, I can't think of his
Morella.
last name now. Bella, and he tells his wife, and I'm like, I'm just sort of starry eyed, and I'm looking at him. I'm thinking, oh, cool, wow. And he shakes my hand, and his hand is the kind of hand that goes up to your elbow, kind of thing.
Yeah.
And so I turn around, and I say, and I introduce myself, and I'm going to bring him back to the line. And as I turn, I realize I have completely forgotten his wife's name, completely forgotten his wife's name, and I've forgotten his last name too at that time. And I'm sitting there going, oh my God, I'm going to have to introduce this guy. How do I introduce him? And this is the only thing that's going through my head, is how do I not embarrass myself with this huge man? But that was kind of intimidating. So.
I guess I'll ask you this, because we're going to get more into specific wrestlers later on, but this is a good time for this. So they did make, say a Mean Gene Okerlund, they did make a referee. Gorilla Monsoon was kind of part of the higher, what I'm trying to say, the executive level position in WWE. Why did they not make a Gorilla Monsoon, considering that they did make those others?
I don't know. I mean, I really don't. I think he just wasn't the face in front of the camera that much,
Right.
and so I think that was it, because you're right. I mean, and at the last year, we did the ref and did Vince,
Mm-hmm.
and so you would think that we would have. So maybe he was going to be done. I don't know.
Right. Interesting. Interesting. So
Right.
walk me through production. So once a wrestler was chosen for the line and you had the press materials, walk me through the production of the figure.
All right. So basically, I'd sort of sketch out, the pose based on the poses that are in the magazine, and what his famous poses are. And then we would look at also what was going to be able to fit on the blister card. So it had to fit in a certain cube size. And from there, I would contact one of my sculptors, whichever one we decided, or I decided was the guy I wanted to work with on this one, or I hadn't given too many other projects to. And remember, too, some of the other designers who were at LJN were using the same sculptors.
Mm-hmm.
So, we had a limited amount of people that could sculpt one of these things. So they would sculpt it in wax, and then they would bring it in, or they would ship it in, because we worked with sculptors out in California, all over the country. So then we'd get the wrestler, we'd comment on it, and we'd sketch out if we thought, he should look more like this or do this. We'd get on the phone with them, send it back, go through our approvals before they would then, we would make the mold of the wax. Then they would make the prototypes. We'd paint up the prototypes. And quite often, it would be the painted prototype that we would bring up to Vince for them to comment on. Because prior to that, I mean, just looking at the wax, sometimes people don't get it. So it kind of comes to life once it's all painted.
Sure, sure.
So in some cases, one case, I have the wax for Hacksaw Kentucky. And so Hacksaw, we actually, the wax I have, he's painted. So we actually painted him because we were bringing up some of the other ones, and we didn't have time to put him in a mold and get a prototype. So we painted up the wax, and brought the painted wax up to him. So that's how fast the process we were working on these things.
Right.
So, I mean, nobody really knows about the waxes, because typically a wax breaks when it's in the mold, because the mold itself is a silicone mold, and it gets very hot. And so when you're pulling the wax out, there's always a weak spot, and they just break around the legs and area. Hands, things like that, fingers will break off. So most of the time, 99% of the time, we take the waxes and we ship it back to the sculptor, because then the sculptor just melts it down and remakes a new one for us. So I've got a series of waxes that you wouldn't expect to have, but yeah, I kept some of those too.
Very
Anyway,
cool.
so then you make the mold, you make the prototypes. We make about 4 prototypes per character. Uh, Now, however many the model shop itself would make after that, or how many good ones we had and bad ones. I mean, if you had air bubbles and stuff like that. But then we would take the 4 of them and we would paint them up, and sometimes paint them up in different colors. So some of the prototypes I have didn't match exactly what was being produced, because maybe the wrestler wrestled in black shorts one day and he wrestled in red shorts the next day. So we would do them in both just to see which one we liked. Or some of the graphics, if we could do more graphics on the characters, we would do that. Um, Sometimes the factory would push back and we could only do a little, some things on it. We couldn't do a lot of stuff on. Uh, so anyway, so prototype to sales samples, and then one of those would go off to the factory, uh, and the rest of them would be stay around for Toy Fair.
Okay. Okay, cool. Now, you mentioned this already earlier, but some of the prototypes, they would undergo slight adjustments before production. Like Bobby the Brain Heenan, the arms were put in a different position, but the rest of the figure looked more or less the same. But then some of them were completely redone, and the one that I'm asked about a lot is Tito Santana. The Tito Santana that was in the press materials looks completely different than the Tito Santana that was released for retail. So my question for you is, from your recollection, what was it about the Tito Santana one in particular that made Vince McMahon want to completely redo it?
I think I want to say that Tito didn't fit the blister,
Okay, okay, interesting. That's
the
interesting.
original one. I think he was spread out too far. I think so. I don't think that he was necessarily a bad one. I got to remember the one I have.
Okay, yeah, 'cause they look completely different if you look at the press material version versus the retail version.
Yeah, and that happened because we were in such a rush that we had to go to photography for the cross sell. I mean, that was like George the Animal Steel with the hair. Everybody wanted to see the hair.
Right.
What happened to him? What happened to the scarf on
Adrian Adonis.
Adrian Adonis? And that was pushback from the factory. The factory could not get the hair right at all. It
It's
just
interesting.
that was because back then it was sort of, well, it was a spray on, so it just wouldn't adhere correctly, and it was kind of masked on there. So we scrubbed that idea and said, okay, it's sculpted hair. We'll just go the sculpting.
Right, right. Now, I've heard that the original plans were not to produce an 8-inch version, and that the 8-inch version was meant to be a 2-up, meaning it was meant to be a larger one just for approval and had more detail. Is that true, or was the plan the whole time to produce an 8-inch version?
No, that's absolutely true. That's absolutely true. And the salesman saw it. They grabbed them. They brought them to the buyers, and the buyers just went crazy. It's like, oh, this is great. It really was a problem. It really was.
I mean, it
Because
would have changed everything, shipping and everything, right? Yeah. Everything changed, and the amount of time it takes to actually mold one of those things. In production time, it's forever. It's forever because it has to cool. You've got this mass amount of vinyl there Hmm.
that has to cool, and so yeah, no, it was a problem. It was a big problem.
Why did they choose to go with solid rubber as opposed to, say, an articulated plastic figure?
Well, again, it was supposed to be those were 2-ups, and so they were supposed to be the bendy size. That was always kind of the idea. Um, so we just didn't change it, but we did start making articulated characters, and we had a whole series of articulated ones we were looking at. But then it was just, I think there was pushback that, we're doing so well with the full size that we just
Right.
didn't do them. We didn't move forward with the line.
That's interesting. Now, one of the prototypes that I have, and we're going to talk more about Sergeant Slaughter in a bit, but one of the prototypes that I have has bendy wires in it. It's the one of the Sergeant Slaughter prototypes. You just mentioned that they had thought about originally making bendy size. Is that why there were bendies in some of the prototypes? Because the plan was to make, a smaller bendy version, or what was that about?
Well, that's exactly right. You have this. You have a Sergeant Slaughter that has the bendy wire in it,
Yes.
and that's an 8-inch size.
Yes.
Wow,
Yeah.
that's unique. That's really unique to have that. Um, because yeah, that was the whole idea, and started out. Okay, we have to make it 8-inch size because this is what the buyers are liking, and everybody went crazy over them. Can we still do wires in them? So this was a Jose thing, but yeah, they tried to put the wires in just to see if they could get a thick enough wire inside that would keep it bent in position.
Interesting. Okay. And then obviously they chose just to go with the solid version.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Yep.
Oh,
Because
interesting.
it just wasn't going to work.
Right, right. Now, how many factories handled production? I've heard that there were two, one in Hong Kong, one in China. Is that true?
I think the Hong Kong I think they were Hong Kong offices, but I think most of the production was done in China anyway.
Okay.
But there were a couple of factories that were controlled over there, and that was guy Francis Chia. In fact, Francis still has a toy company in the U.S. He lives in New Jersey.
Okay. Okay. Now, the first series that came out, Series 1, they had plastic stands in the package, and that was quickly discontinued. What was the story behind that?
You know, I don't know. I got to say because I wasn't there for the first round, but
Okay.
I think that they just figured they could cost reduce and they didn't really need them.
That's what I figured, yeah. Now, did you know, because we were talking off air about this, the online community that exists today for LJNs. Did you know that those stands now, they're being produced and sold using 3D printers?
I heard that. I did hear that.
Yeah.
That is pretty wild.
For sure, for sure, for sure. Now, another big topic we got to get into is variants because there's a lot of discussion about variants. Some of them were minor, like different paint colors, for example. Roddy Piper, one would have brown boots, one would have red boots.
Yeah,
Is it true that the minor variance was basically due to just the factory having different colored paint, accidentally?
absolutely.
That's all it was.
Yeah, yeah. Two different factories. They probably thought the red was brown, or they probably thought the brown was red. I mean, they just screwed up. That was it. That was as simple as that.
Now, some variants were more significant. Like Miss Elizabeth, there was a gold skirt and a purple skirt, and Special Delivery Jones had a red shirt and a yellow Hawaiian style shirt. Can you explain those major variants? Like, why did they exist, and how was it determined which wrestlers would get them?
I don't remember, and like Miss Elizabeth. I mean, I think that I'm not sure why she had the two different color. I don't remember why she had the two different color skirts, except that both colors she had. And again, that was probably a factory. They probably had the material, so they just did that, and they had the gold and we had the red. But I don't specifically remember why she had the different skirts. And who was the other guy?
Special Delivery Jones, SD Jones. He had a red shirt and a yellow shirt.
Yeah, yeah. Again, and he was at towards the end too, so I don't really remember why that happened.
He was
Honestly, I
actually
wish I
early.
could.
He was, I think, series 3, I think, 2 or 3.
Was he?
Yeah,
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 you're right. Yeah.
yeah. Now,
I don't know why.
what about
I don't.
accessories? Like some guys had accessories like a hat or the 2x4. Some guys didn't. How was it determined who got accessories?
I mean, that was part of their character. So if it was a big deal in their character, then we made them.
Okay, okay.
Otherwise we didn't. Now Slick was interesting because we actually did his hat. We didn't really have to,
Right.
but we did. So that kind
Okay.
of goes against that, but it's true.
Now, I got to ask you about a few more just because people are so obsessed with the variants. Corporal Kirshner, there was 3 different versions of Corporal Kirshner. One was clean shaven, one had stubble, and the other had a full beard. Do you remember that? And do you know why that was?
Well, the full beard is because they couldn't do the stubble. The clear was because it never looked right, and so if you have one that actually has stubble, that's pretty cool.
Yeah.
I think that's probably the more rare one, and then probably the full beard, and then the clean shaven was probably the one that got produced the most, I
Yeah,
would think.
that's interesting because now in terms of in the package, the bearded one is the most rare one.
Yeah, because if you could find one with stubble on it, I'd be shocked.
Interesting, interesting. Now,
Because
Junkyard
they weren't
Dog,
good. They weren't good with stubble.
they
They
weren't
weren't good.
good.
They weren't good with.
It was
So
either all one way or all the other way,
that's
basically.
right. That's right.
Junkyard Dog was another one. He had three different colors of chain. There was a red, a black, or a gray. So same question: why the different colors?
That's a material problem issue. They just made it anything they wanted to. I mean,
That's interesting. That's good to know. So all it came down to was, well, right now we've got gray plastic, so we're doing gray.
that was fact. Yeah, that was all factory. Yeah,
That's
absolutely,
very interesting. Very
absolutely.
interesting.
Yeah.
All right, let's move on and talk about Sergeant Slaughter because this is a big story that LGN collectors like to talk about. From your perspective, working for LGN, what happened with Sergeant Slaughter?
He just made a better deal outside of the WWF, and so they couldn't do him. They couldn't make his figure.
How close
So
were they to
that's.
producing it?
Oh, I think they were really close.
Yeah.
Really close. Yeah. I mean,
Was he going to be part of Series One? Was that the plan?
Oh, I think so. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Now, I'm sure that you're familiar with this. Hasbro created an LJN style figure because Sergeant Slaughter went to Hasbro as part of the G.I. Joe thing. So they created an LJN style figure. You can only get it through mail order. They had print ads where they had the figure stomping on the LJN wrestlers. I'm curious. I'm curious what you thought of the Hasbro Sergeant Slaughter, and if you ever heard about what Vince McMahon thought of it.
I never heard about what Vince McMahon thought about it, and honestly, we hadn't given it much thought. I mean, even Jose, we talked about it, and it was never a big deal. We got a chuckle out of it.
Oh,
That was
good.
about it. So.
Good. Now let's talk about guys that were supposed to be part of a series and weren't. And for me, the newest one I found out about was Killer Khan. I was telling you off the air that when I saw pictures on eBay, I thought it was a custom because I had never heard of it. And it turns out that I'm calling it a new prototype because you had a wax and you decided to produce 5 versions of it. I think you numbered all 5 on the bottom.
Yes.
What series was he supposed to be in and why wasn't he included?
I've got to believe that he was in the last series. And I don't know. I mean, he really wasn't a wrestler for very long,
Right.
but I don't know why we never produced him because, as I say, we went to wax. We had the full sculpted wax of him, and he was broken. So it leads me to believe that we must have done a mold of him
Mm-hmm.
back then, but nothing's ever popped up, and it's kind of weird because I would have thought it might have
Right. Interesting.
if there was a mold of him. But so as I say, we had the wax, everything was ready to go, and he was definitely in line to be done.
Right.
I don't remember why. I don't. No idea.
What other wrestlers were close to being part of the line, meaning a wax was made just like Killer Khan, but then it didn't happen that you can
Yeah,
remember?
I don't remember any others.
Oh, really?
I don't remember any other character that was made that we never produced.
Now, the original press materials when LJN was coming out, they mentioned that the Haiti Kid was coming soon. Do you remember that at all? That the Haiti Kid was this is a term you're not supposed to use anymore, but it was a midget wrestler from back in the day. Do you remember anything about the Haiti Kid?
I sort of remember the conversation about him, and even back then, it just didn't seem very politically correct.
Yes,
But
right.
but otherwise, I don't remember why that didn't happen.
Okay. Now the card backs for Series 6, and I know that Series 6 was produced by another company, and we'll talk about that later. But the card backs for Series 6, they pretty famously listed wrestlers that did not end up getting released, like Bad News Brown and Brother Love and the Bushwhackers. Uh, are you aware about what happened with those wrestlers and why they never got released?
No, I have no idea.
Okay.
Sorry.
Okay. And now one other question I got to ask you is the original series all used flesh tone colored paint, or I should say flesh tone colored rubber. But the later ones used whatever color was the predominant one on the figure. So, for example, the Honky Tonk Man was blue rubber, and Bam Bam Bigelow was black. I assume that was done to cut down on the cost of materials.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. I mean, I think that the color, the predominant color, is good to have in the predominant area, or I'm sorry, the making the vinyl the same color as the predominant whatever it is the best way to go, because paint doesn't stick very well to those characters, as everyone knows. So if blue is where you're going to see it the most, I think that was the idea, is that, let's make them blue.
Right, right. I know that kids back in the day, they hated playing with those because when the paint wore off, it looked like they had frostbite. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Did you ever hear any backlash at the time, or was there ever any, pushback or anything about the fact they used a different color for the rubber?
I never heard any.
Okay.
No.
Okay. Well, let's talk about 1989. So you left LJN Toys in 1988. From what you remember, or from what you were told, what happened that caused Grand Toys to take over the WWF license? I heard that Entratech, an issue with the Entratech guns, had something to do with it.
That was, I mean, I had heard a lot of things, but that was the first time that I had heard that as being the more specific reason why that all happened. Back at that time, toys were going through kind of a flux anyway, because if you can imagine, at Christmas time, any parent might say, all right, I have $100 or $50 or whatever it is for my kid this year at Christmas. This is my budget. And so you buy a bunch of toys, you buy some underwear and some clothes, and boom, you're done. If it's a boy, if it's a girl, it's a whole different group of things. So now here come video games, and a video game console is pretty expensive, and the games themselves were pretty expensive, but everybody was asking for them. So how many toys are you going to buy? You're not going to buy as many toys because your budget now includes these video games. And so, the toy market was going down anyway. And so LJN was following that with the into the video lines. And so I think that was a big, big push. The Entratech was selling well, and yeah, they had some lawsuits, but I don't think that would have stopped them. I think it was the direction of the company going into the video games and realizing that, they don't have to do this. So they'll do the video stuff. And that was all farmed out. We had a couple of guys who stayed on as designers, and they would travel the world into different video game designers. So
how did the Grand Toys thing come together? Like, was there a prior association with LGN? Like, where did Grand Toys come from?
Yeah, honestly, I don't know. I don't have an idea on that. Yeah. As a designer, we didn't, at least I didn't get that involved in a lot of the higher up decisions.
Right. Yeah.
And at that point, I was working doing wrestling figures, but I was also doing lines like, did suckers, and there were these gas-powered cars. They wanted to come up with this whole line of, they called them gassers. And we at Toy Fair, and I'm looking at these things going, are you kidding me? You want to do, this is when electric cars were coming out, the remote control cars, and they were a huge hit. So somebody got the great idea to do gas powered ones. I'm like, holy shit! Do you understand the mess that is involved in having these things run?
Oh, for sure.
How loud they are,
and liability too.
Oh my God! And you're not going to sell it to anybody in a city, because they've got no place to run with these things. I mean, it just seemed like a really bad idea to me. But I was kind of involved in that for that next toy fair, or that last toy fair. That was the big push, the new big push.
Now, before everything went down with LJN losing the WWF license, were there plans for future series? Like, had they started, planning out the next line?
Oh yeah, we had the lists of new wrestlers. Yeah, I think that's probably where a lot of them we were finishing up the ones that you see as the 1989 characters and the ones that went over to Grand Toys. So there were future plans, but we hadn't even got to sculpting on those yet.
Right. Okay. I want to ask you about the second mold of Hulk Hogan. Because the card for the second Hulk Hogan, it's got both the LJN logo and the Grand Toys logo on it. So they made two. One of them, he had a red shirt. One of them, he had a white shirt. They were both on black cards that said collector's edition on them. But again, they've got both logos from both companies. What's the story? Was that technically part of Series 5?
Um, yes, but I don't know why that had both at that time. I don't know what happened there. I'd actually have to ask a friend who did did all the packaging side of it, see why they put the other logos on there, see if she remembers.
Right, right. Now, Adrian Adonis, I got to ask you about this one. So he left the WWF in May of 1987, and he passed away in 88. There was a re-release of his action figure on a collector's edition black card after he left the company. Do you know what the story was behind that? Were they just trying to get rid of inventory? Was it some kind of a memorial to him, or do you have no idea?
I have no idea. I have
Okay.
no idea.
Okay. Now this next one, this might be a question for a Grand Toys employee, but I'm going to ask you anyway. Uh, Series 6, they made a line of new wrestlers, like the Ultimate Warrior and Rick Rude, but they also re-released a bunch of previous wrestlers on black cards, like Big John Studd and Brutus Beefcake. I was wondering if that was done as a way to get rid of excess inventory.
I'm sure it was.
Okay.
Because I'm sure the factory had all these other characters, and I think that they were popular characters too. So whether they had extra inventory or they just decided, what, let's dig back into the original molds and we'll do those too. They probably typically, I mean, when a company takes over, they buy the use of all the molds along with everything else in the company. So when Grand Toys makes the deal and they buy the rights to those, I'm sure they bought the rights to the molds too.
Right.
So they probably looked through it and said, what, which were the best selling ones that we did back then, and let's bring those out again, just to recoup a lot of the money that they paid to buy it out.
Right. Makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah.
Now, LJN made a lot of stuff using the WWF license aside from the 8-inch rubber wrestlers. They had accessories like a wrestling ring. There were bendies, thumb wrestlers, stretch wrestlers. They made those 16-inch versions of Hulk Hogan and Roddy Piper.
Yeah.
And other stuff like the Hulkamania workout set and all this stuff. Can you think of anything LJN made or had plans to make with the license that was really different or really off the wall, so to speak?
Well, as I said, we had the articulated ones, and those have popped up a little bit too. You see a few of the articulated. I had a couple of those. We also had for Hulk Hogan, we had I guess he's 11-inch. That one of the you pinch his legs and his arms move.
Okay, yeah.
So we had that. Well, all the vehicles. I mean, the vehicles was really the direction we wanted to go into. Because that was going to expand the whole line. So we did the series of motorcycles, and we've got the cars that we did, and so that was really going to expand the line out, because that's the direction you always want to do when you have a character license, is all the accessories. So if you can do, for the wrestlers, it's the wrestling rings, but then when they did the cartoon, like, great, now we can do some vehicles too, and if you could keep it going, you expand it into all those different areas. So
Sure. Do you know what the connection was between LJN and other companies that were using the Wrestling Superstars IP? Like, there's other stuff that was created using the Wrestling Superstars logo. Like Winston Toys made an eraser set, Rock and Wrestling eraser set. Milton Bradley made a board game. There was even a soap that was made by Fulford out of Markham, Ontario, Canada. Do you know anything? Was it just maybe the license of the Wrestling Superstars IP?
yeah, when you make a license, it's usually pretty specific to an area of product.
Mm-hmm.
So if you are making wrestling figures, that doesn't necessarily include the soaps. So
Right.
if somebody comes to the WWF and says, "Hey, I want to make soap," with your license, they go, "Okay, yeah, we'll do that too."
Got it.
Yeah.
Did you know that I think I was going to ask you this later, but I'll ask you now. Did you know that LJN, apparently the IP was sold last year and a tag team called the Young Bucks released an LJN style tag team set because they were able to get the rights, or somebody was able to get the rights to LJN from a toys perspective. Were you aware of that?
Yeah, one of the collectors had sent me that info when it first started happening. So yeah, that's pretty cool. I mean, I didn't know there was anybody who even had the rights to sell it.
Right. Yeah.
I mean, I'm kind of curious who that is, because Jack Friedman was the head of LJN,
Right.
and he's gone. As I say, Francis is still around, but because he was one of the co-owners. But I don't know. I'm curious about who made that deal.
I want to ask you this question, and again, this happened after you left LJN Toys, but I'm going to ask you anyway. Back in November of 1991, the original Sling 'em Fling 'em wrestling ring was recalled because there were 4 cases of children getting injured by falling on one of the posts, and I guess one kid actually got impaled by one of the ring
Yeah.
posts. Did you hear about that story at the time?
Oh yeah, yeah. No, and you know what? Jose was the guy who designed that ring initially. That was at the first year, and yeah, he was really upset by it. I mean, the fact that some kid landed on it. I mean, that was horrible.
Sure.
I mean, he had they had a whole court case and everything, and you know, so yeah, that was terrible. That was really terrible. He felt awful about it. But you know, goes back at a time when we were able to make all sorts of things that, you know, regulations have since decided that we couldn't do. You know,
Sure. So, I mean, the Undertech guns, apparently they were being used in robberies because they look real.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's, you know, I did a line. They were called suckers. They were these wacky characters that were blow darts. And so, you know, each blow dart had its own character shape and everything, and it had a dart on the end. You couldn't do those now. I mean, my God.
You can't do a lot of things now, isn't that
Yeah,
true?
really. Oh, absolutely. Absolutely.
I want to ask your thoughts on customs. So there are artists this day and age, talented artists, that are making really high quality LGN style customs. Some of them, they basically just take the retail, you know, rubber wrestler, they 3D scan it, 3D print it in like a resin type material, paint it all up. But some of them are completely original, where they will make a custom based on, say, one of the wrestlers of today. What are your thoughts on all of that, on the fact that there are guys now actually making customs in the LGN style?
Listen, I think it's really cool. I mean, I think that anybody who wants to make those kinds of things and is doing a good job, I think that's great. I really do. I mean, I love the whole idea that there are people out there who like it. I mean, I was so jazzed about it when I start talking to people like you, and you have a lot of questions about a line that I worked on. You know, back then we didn't think of ourselves as doing something special. We were doing a line of toys.
Sure. Yeah.
So no, I think it's cool. In fact, you know, you talk about the customs. A couple of the collectors, after we did the Killer Con, they said, "Do you have any other waxes?" And I said, "Oh yeah." I mean, I showed them the waxes I had. I mean, the Hulk Hogan was one of them that I have the wax for, and we have a Honky Tonk Man and a bunch of others. And they were like, "Can you do a custom of the Hulk Hogan?" He said, "Well, I can, but it's not going to be cheap. I mean, because I wasn't going to do the 3D printing. I said, if I do it, I'm going to do it like old school. And I have a old school friend who's a model maker, and so, you know, he was back in the day, kind of making the molds and all that stuff. So we cleaned up the wax on the Hogan, you know, put his arms back on, and made the mold, and then we numbered another series of for the Hulk Hogan, and I sold out a few of those, and did the same thing with Honky Tonk. You know, so, you know, and I tell people, like, when I've sold the prototypes that I have, I give them a certificate of authenticity, and I sign it, and I tell them that, listen, you know, these characters I had for the last 30 something years. I'm the only one who's had them. They came right from my office, you know, and you're the next person who now owns it. So that's the certificate, basically what it says. And so for these that we're doing these custom ones now, we tell them, and I think I sent one to you.
You did. Yep.
That we're making them now. You know, not telling them that they're from back then. I'm not trying to hide anything. These are custom, but they're still about as close you're going to get to a 30, to one of the characters that was done back then. So
Yeah, well, for sure. The Killer Con especially.
and we try to do it in the same kind of style that we would back then. We didn't want to overpaint. We don't want to overpromise.
Yep.
What we could do. So we kind of make it in the same style as what was done. So they're kind of cool. It was fun.
Before I started talking to you, before I ever met you, and I heard about the Killer Con, I was talking to Matt Cardona, and one of the things I said to him was, okay, because I ended up buying one of the ones off of eBay that you made. And I said to Matt Cardona, what happens if I spend, a bunch of money on this and then I find out that the guy that made those 5, now he's mass producing them? Yeah. And Matt Cardona said, he said, I'll be upset if that happens, but I think you're good. And so, yeah, I bought the one off of eBay. So as far as I know, I've got one of the 5. And I do consider it a prototype as opposed to a custom. It's just kind of, I guess, a new prototype.
Yeah, absolutely. My God, I'm the one who was responsible for the characters for those 3 years, and I was responsible for Killer Khan. So, the fact that I worked with a model maker to clean him up, and we did the paint, and we did all the other stuff, we did it exactly like we would have done it back then. Sure. So that's certainly as close to a prototype as you're going to get. That one.
Yep. I'll tell you this. So some of the prototypes that you had sold to Matt Cardona, I bought from Matt Cardona later on because I didn't know who you were at the time. Right. And initially Matt said, these aren't for sale, because he did a video over Christmas time where he showed them all off. And there were certain ones I wanted. And he said they're not for sale unless you make it interesting, he said. I ended up paying him, I know, way more than I probably should have. But the thing is, and I've talked to him about this, and I've talked to other collectors about this, and I'll tell you the same thing since you have these prototypes. They're worth what someone's willing to pay. Right. And I've had people say to me a few times, hey, what's this one worth? What's this one worth? And I always tell them they're worth what someone's willing to pay. It's hard to keep a price list for this kind of stuff. Zack Ryder can check out this clip.
And Zack Ryder's going to be thrilled. So these are Jimmy's
I'm sending this to him because Zack Ryder said I way overpaid for this figure right here.
My boss bought the Sergeant Slaughter prototype.
Which one?
The one that you couldn't buy.
Oh, okay. The painted LJN prototype? That one?
Whichever one was at the toy department in Cincinnati.
Yes, that is the one. That's fine.
Feelings, thoughts, emotions?
Well, here's the thing. So, did you watch the episode at all?
Oh, I love the episode.
So Kurt Hawkins threw out this insane number that I was not going to spend anyway. Yeah. So, I was denied, but I wasn't going to buy it for that price. So, he bought it for way more than that. So, congrats, I guess. Yeah. I have it unpainted. The painted one's obviously cooler, but way more money. So, I'm actually glad that I don't have it.
You're glad that you don't have. I'm glad that you said that because that will eat him up.
I'm sorry,
that will eat him up.
You spent way too much money. You got ripped off.
Zack Ryder knows memorabilia, so he knows figures are worth what you're willing to pay. That's what they're worth. And so I don't regret what I paid for the Killer Con. I don't regret what I paid Matt Cardona because I wanted them. Like, I'm a collector and I wanted them, and so I was willing to pay that price.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, no, and they were part of history. They're absolutely a part of history. So.
Sure. Yep. I got a few questions from our listeners for you, and then after that, I'll let you go. So this first one, this is from Andy Quigley. You kind of already answered this, but I'm gonna ask it anyway. He said, how are poses determined? As a kid, most of the wrestlers I played with were ones that could punch, suplex, DDT. Some of them, like Andre Hogan and Greg Valentine, were great, but Cowboy Bob Orton and Rick Rude were just awful to play with.
Well, that's good, honest. Yeah, I don't know why those couple. I mean, because honestly, I look back on some of them and I go, they're kind of just posed. They're not really a good, exciting wrestling pose on a couple of those. So yeah, I'm not going to get Toy of the Year award on a couple of those. I agree. So, but it really was from the press kits, and we looked at their poses and said, you know what, this this pose kind of makes sense for him. In some ways, it was a sculpture of them and less of a toy, and in
Right.
some ways, they were a toy. So
Right.
we were kind of trying to do both.
This next one's from Steve Cortez. He says, were you aware of any wrestlers upset with the appearance of their figure?
No, not at all. I don't know anybody who sat there and said, "Oh, that doesn't look like me at all." In fact, I have Macho Man and Elizabeth, and I never really thought that that we did a great job on Elizabeth. Her face, she was much prettier, I think, in person than what we were able to capture in the sculpture. But I've got, they signed both of the figures, and they were really nice too. They were nice to me.
Right,
so.
right. I got to ask you about Miss Elizabeth for a second. Did you know that an LJN employee, and I'm sure you know them, produced a naked version of the Miss Elizabeth?
Oh yeah.
I think you had it, right? I think.
Well, I don't have the naked one.
I bought it from Matt. I got it from Matt Cardona.
Yeah, no, that wasn't mine. That was actually, and full disclosure on that. The LJN employee did not make a nude of Elizabeth. The original sculptor who sculpted Miss Elizabeth, he sculpted one in lingerie that I have.
Oh, okay.
And then that got modified. Then they removed the lingerie. So
is there like a mold out there for a naked Miss Elizabeth?
I have no idea.
Okay.
I don't know.
Okay.
I know who would have it, but I don't think. I doubt it. I doubt it.
Yeah.
Plus,
okay.
any of the molds that were done back then, I've been told that a 30-year-old silicone mold isn't going to do real well. So.
Right. Well, I got to tell you this side story. So when I got the naked Miss Elizabeth, I posted a picture of it on Facebook, but I blurred out certain parts.
Yeah.
You would not believe how many private messages I got from people asking if I would send them the uncensored picture.
That's funny.
Dozens. So that tells you about some people, I guess. This next one, this is from Gus Jr. He says, how many units of the 1984 Hulk Hogan were sold? Do you know the total overall units sold?
I don't. I have no idea.
Okay.
No idea.
I guess the business stuff was handled by someone else.
Yeah, but the second one we did, I liked him a lot better than the other. And I met Hogan, Terry, and he signed autographs. Says, thanks for the hair. So.
Oh, no. Nice. Joe Petka asks, how were the figures painted? I mean, with all that volume, they couldn't have been hand painted.
No, in the factories, well, they're sprayed. There's a spray mask that goes onto the large areas, and they get it's a spray mask. But for the most part, it's as close to a hand paint as you can get back then. That was the way they were kind of done.
Yeah, it looks like it too.
A lot of hand work. Yeah.
Yeah. I can understand why they didn't do the George Steele hair, because that would have been just a paint.
Oh yeah, because it's a spray mask, and so you have to have your mask, or it's a piece of plastic board that goes in front, and with a bunch of little holes in it, and that would go right against the figure, and then it would get sprayed. But inevitably, when you lift that mask, I mean, the spray would just merge to all around. It's just like a mess. So
right. Ryan Flynn asks, why didn't they make an Intercontinental title belt as part of the line?
We did make one belt.
They made two, actually. They made the tag team belts, and they made the world title, but they never made the Intercontinental title, which was like the middle title.
Yeah, I don't know.
Okay. Craig Newman asks, we kind of touched upon this a little bit. He said, do you know whatever happened to the prototypes of the original Tito Santana figure or the Roddy Piper with the Black Panther on his shirt?
No. Oh no, I've got a Tito Santana prototype, but I don't know whatever happened to Roddy Piper.
Right. Okay. Yeah, and you've got the Tito prototype that was released, but the original one I haven't been able to come across.
Yeah, I don't know what happened to that one.
Anakin JMT, this is the last one. Anakin JMT asks, how do you feel action figures today have improved on what you made, and what could they learn from your line?
Oh, I think that the action figures today are just incredible because of 3D printing. I mean, you really get some incredible detail.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, back then these were actual artists creating their impression of the character, as close as they could get to that. And nowadays, I mean, it's just incredible what they can do. But for the type of character it is, if you want to bounce them around, which is what wrestling is all about, I think ours were great.
For sure, they're very unique, and there's never really been anything else like them, that I know of anyway.
Yeah, but they'd probably be seen as being too dangerous now if we made them.
Yeah, maybe. I remember the King Kong Bundy was like a brick.
He really was. He was huge.
So as we wrap up here, tell me, what did you do after LJN Toys, and did you keep up with wrestling at all?
No, actually, because of the layoffs, my wife was in graphic design, and I was doing toys, and so we started doing some freelance work, and then we ended up starting a design business, and with our partners and another couple from LJN, we've been in business since then. So for about 30 years, we have a company.
Good for you. Good for you.
So we've got about 22 people, and knock on wood, we're doing pretty well.
Oh, very nice. Very nice.
Yeah.
All right. Well, we've been talking to Bill Stanhope, former product design manager for LJN Toys. I really appreciate your time today. You've been very gracious, and I really appreciate you taking this time for me.
Well, good talking to you. Bye-bye.